There's a lot going on in this movie.
It was like I was watching it for the first time.
I like this movie.
It has a special place in my heart.
Very close to my heart.
This was a good one.
I want to like this movie.
What? Seriously?
I loved it.
Very flat, kind of boring.
This movie blows me away. This movie turns me on.
Terrible. It is terrible. All these keys everywhere. Influences, baby.
Huge fan.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Hello, and welcome out there in podcast and YouTube land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, hence these little graphics that are up behind us and you can see or hear us if you clicked on us on a podcast. My name is David, and we've been doing this for a while. Johnny Has the Keys is two guys sit around, and we've been talking about horror and science fiction movies all of our lives. So we decided, hey, why don't we do that for everyone else? So that's what we do. We pick a topic every week and we deep dive into it, especially if we don't like it. We dive, I think, sometimes deeper than if we do like it. But we talk about key elements of that particular topic and then things that topic influenced, key influences that it did down the road. We've been doing it for a long time. Hopefully, if you're new to us and just found us, we'd love to know how you found us. So let us know down below. Leave a comment. Say, hey, I just clicked on you guys because you look goofy or whatever reason for that. And if you're returning, we're so glad you did. We could always use a review. So a little review never hurts and helps us find new people and new things. Again, my name is David. I'm here with my really good friend, Tim. Tim, how are you? What have you been doing? You're on a black scape there. It's almost Christmas. What are you doing? So.
I know it is. It's the season of giving. You were talking about giving people stuff. I mean, there's only 23 shopping days left till Christmas. You realize?
There you go. I hope everyone's wrapped and under the tree, and I'm sure you've got like 15 trees set up in here.
Yeah, maybe 6.
Okay.
Well, what did I do? We usually start these off with what we did in our genre week, and I did watch a horror movie that has been on my list. It is a little film called Lovely, Dark, and Deep.
Ooh, okay. Love the title and the poster. That's cool.
It's Robert Frost, right?
I think.
And I still have promises to keep. Yeah, it's the Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, I think, Robert Frost.
Yeah.
Right. English major here.
Yeah, I can tell.
Is an English language Portuguese movie, which surprised me because you would not know it's Portuguese if you watched it. I mean, everyone in it speaks English. Stunning location shooting, though, and it's all obviously woods because it's about a park ranger.
An evil park ranger?
No, it's a good park ranger, but you start finding out stuff gradually.
Wait, I think I may have seen it before you tell me. I think I may have seen the trailer because it was. Does she it's not get lost, but she's like in an alternate place or something, or can't find her way or something like that? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. The trailer looked awesome.
Yeah. It's not what you expect.
Okay.
It's written and directed by a woman named Teresa Sutherland, and it's her debut. She's only directed shorts before, and it's really well directed. But she was a writer first. She wrote a movie called The Wind, which is on my radar, and I've been meaning to watch it. It is like a prairie period piece, prairie setting about, I don't know, a scary wind or something. Anyway, this movie, oh, wow, I got my notes all messed up here. Okay. Anyway, this movie is beautifully shot. Like I said, it's about a park ranger that travels into she becomes a park ranger in this gigantic wilderness forest. I can't remember the name of it. So they each have their own sectors. And when people get lost, they help find them. She has an ulterior motive, though. And this is not really that much of a plot point, but she had a sister disappear when she was young. So she's obsessed with finding people.
Okay.
Okay. The cast is great. It stars, guess who? Georgina Campbell, who has also been on my radar for a while because she is like a new Scream Queen.
Okay.
She was in The Barbarian. She was in The Watchers, that Shyamalan movie directed by his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
which did not get good reviews. She was in a Black Mirror episode that was pretty popular. I can't remember the name of it. I've mentioned it to you before, as well as the
Mm-hmm.
sequel to Bird Box. So she's done quite a few horror movies, including this
Okay.
one. But it also stars Nick Blood, who you may remember from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it
Okay.
also stars Wai Ching Ho, who I knew from Daredevil. She was Madame Gao, one of the great villains. So the cast is great. I told you that the one line synopsis is a new backcountry ranger travels alone through the dangerous wilderness, hoping to uncover the origins of a tragedy that haunted her since she was a child. It scores 90% on Rotten Tomatoes with 39 reviews. I found it dark. I found it surreal in places, a little disturbing. But the cool thing about it is that you immediately, once you realize what is going on and see the end of this movie, you want to see it again because you're like, oh,
Wow.
I've
Okay.
got to go back because now that I know what's going on, I want to look for stuff. So that's
I
one
love
of the
that writing.
reasons
I love
why.
that style of writing. When you're
Right.
that clever to make them immediately want to dive back in and see what clues you gave them that they didn't see. You know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've added this to our list. There we go.
Oh, okay.
So it may
Excellent.
end up on an episode down the road, but that's what I did. Lovely, dark, and deep.
Well, I'm continuing my retrograde, so to speak, because, like I said last time, I just got the wild hair and wanted to do it because I think because of Dark Tower and because of the reboot of The Exorcist, everything else, but I wanted to go back to the Flanagan world and have continued doing rewatching The Haunting of Hill House. And I think last week I'd made it up to the second episode because I just watched like the first two. But this time I had to go through the two storms. So I went through Bent Neck Lady, that episode, and then the one right after that is The Two Storms, which is my favorite episode of the series. And again, it's just every single episode. You just said watching it again because we deep dove into it, what, 6, 7 years ago?
No, it was 5 years ago. It was in our first season,
Yeah.
but maybe a little over 5 years. But that was our second time watching it when we
Hmm.
did it for the season. So this would be your third time. I've not watched it a third time.
Yeah. And like we said last week, just being able to, when you're in a normal scene that I know what's happening in the scene, I'm suddenly fixed on the background. I'm just looking in the
Looking for
background and
ghosts.
looking for ghosts all over the place. But then again, just watching the craft of the way he works with this cast and the way he has sent now knowing how he's worked since with several of the same cast in other projects. And it's like they've got their own chemistry, they've got their own thing going on, and it's just the way he layers the story and tells it. It's a brilliant piece of television. I think Netflix should still be touting it as the most bestest series we ever done because it is
Yeah.
just great.
I think he got
Uh,
outshadowed by Stranger Things, and then I don't know.
See, and that's Stranger Things is good. I'm not saying
Hmm.
it's not good, but it's hard to go back to the well over and over again. And like this new Stranger Things, season 5, the last season or whatever, everybody's been saying online.
They're
So
in
are they in
college.
college yet? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
because that's what it looks like. They've grown so big
Right.
already that it's hard for them to do it. But anyway, so that's what I did on my time. I made it to The Two Storms, which is the episode that's done in 4 cuts, 4 like 13-minute sections. And it is so well done.
Mm.
And it's not like, I mean, and it really is like, what's the Wells one? The first one that had that full long tracking shots, like an 8-minute cut.
The
No, the one after Touch of Evil.
touch of
And
evil.
because the opening shot's like 6, 8 minutes long in that. Or Corzon, who always does his huge, long, got Gravity, his huge one shot things. This is like that, and it goes everywhere. It's up
Yeah.
the stairs and around the corner and through the window and down this.
I think I told you, we were talking before this about that show, The Bear. There's an
Yeah.
episode of it that's either first or second season. I can't remember. And the entire episode's like one shot.
One
It is-
shot.
and
Yeah.
it's
Love
chaotic.
it.
Everything is chaos. And it's, you just like, how do they do that? How do they choreograph this?
Yeah, and rehearse it and do it. And it must be interesting for the movie actors who aren't used to theater, because that's a theater environment. I mean, if you're let's say your shot is 8 minutes, or your episode, let's say, is 20, whatever, and you're 15 minutes in and somebody screws up or misses a mark or something's wrong, you have to go back and
Yeah.
reset everything and do it all again. And that's just,
Well, and at least in Hill House, it was a big set. This Bear is like a small restaurant. I'm like, how are they maneuvering that camera around? It has
Yeah.
to be handheld.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of single shots are handheld or they're handoffs, where you've got the
Mhm.
camera and then suddenly during that shot, somebody else is clipping the crane onto it and taking it off so it can go over
That's
there.
crazy,
it's just
man.
so cool. Choreography.
It's such a
Anyway.
good way for a director to show off.
Yep.
And that's
Yeah.
what Flanagan's doing in that. Yeah.
Hey, that's a great segue.
Yeah.
director
it
showing
is.
off.
Well, or director showing off. Yes. That is perfect. Also iconic. We are, as we mentioned earlier, in the Christmas season or the holiday
are.
season. And we normally do 3 episodes that are somewhat related. And this
Mhm.
Christmas, we are doing Universal horror.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We have already covered some majors, and I wanted to find some that are well, this one is probably the most popular, the one we're doing today. But then we chose a couple of others that people might not have on their radar. This one, though, is 1935's Bride of Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm. Dun, 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 dun.
Every
Dun,
time I
dun.
watch this movie, I find new things and learn new things about it, especially when I watch documentaries. It is directed by James Whale, who we know did the original Frankenstein, and we covered that our first season as well. However, I think it's due a redux. I've been thinking about that for a while, because it is such a monument in the canon of horror movies. James Whale is probably one of the more famous horror movie directors of that era, because he is known for 4 Universal horror movies that are held in high regard. This one, Frankenstein, The Old Dark House, which has got some comedic elements. Actually, they all have comedic elements, with the exception of maybe Frankenstein, and The Invisible Man.
Yep.
All iconic movies. The Old Dark House may not be, but if we ever cover it, which it is on our list, there are reasons why that movie is popular as well. He was an English theater director, and he actually directed on Broadway before he came to Hollywood,
Yes.
which is really
Had that
cool.
in my notes.
Yeah.
And he was great. He went on, even his non-horror stuff is good. I mean, this guy directed Showboat, which was probably his big deal, but he also did a really cool version of Man in the Iron Mask that I remember seeing when I was a kid. And his life story is very interesting. So much so they've done documentaries and movies about it. So
Yeah, I've actually read the book and seen the movie. Christopher Bram wrote a book called Father of Frankenstein, and then it was adapted into a movie by Bill Condon called Gods and Monsters. Bill Condon, for those of you that don't know, also directed Chicago, I believe. He's pretty well known.
Yep.
But this movie, they had a hard time convincing James Whale to come back after doing Frankenstein. And there were other treatments involved, which they were teasing him with. One included a story of the educated monster continuing Henry's research, whereas another one was Henry's creation of a death ray right before a world war. Neither one of those worked. But this is the story they went with. And I'm going to read this.
And one is similar to the novel, and one is not. Those are two extremes because the novel has an entire second half, essentially, that's not in Frankenstein, the original
Right.
movie. And the creature does become more social, able to talk, able to converse.
And he travels the world.
Yeah, travels the world. So having him be more articulate was inspired, I think, by the book.
Yes,
So.
they did add other aspects from the book into this film. And the plot of this film is after recovering from injuries sustained in the mob attack upon himself and his creation. He clearly died in that first movie, but they kind of resurrect him for this.
Oh, I know that last shot. I mean, I said, there's no way anybody survives hitting that windmill blade like that.
No,
I mean,
it would have broke his back.
Yes, yes.
Dr. Frankenstein falls under the control of his former mentor, Dr. Pretorius, who is one of the most interesting characters in this movie, who insists that the now chastened doctor resume his experiments in creating new life. Meanwhile, the monster, who also survives, is on the run from those who wish to destroy him without understanding that his intentions are generally good despite his lack of socialization and self-control, which results in a really memorable scene at a cottage with a hermit in this one.
Mm-hmm.
What are your memories of this movie?
From what I was thinking about that because we normally try to say, what was your first impression or how did you come to this movie or whatever? And I still remember seeing it probably Shock Theater on television. Obviously didn't see it in a theater, and nobody that I know of has ever resurrected it in a theater that I've known about near me. Or
I would love to see it on the big screen with Frankenstein, like a double feature.
Yeah, like I did last year at the Capitol, I did Frankenstein on the big screen. And it's awesome. It was great seeing it. Even in that 4:3 format, it's still just so great. And the restorations are so, they've taken such care in the restorations of them. So I'd love to see this one, but I didn't. But I remember it. I mean, I think even a year after I'd watched it when I was a kid or whatever, if you'd asked me about it, I would have said, oh, and yeah, and the bride's like the whole last half of it, and they have a fight and blah, 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 and all this. And I had totally forgotten that she's in like freaking 6 minutes of this
It's
movie.
like 10 minutes. Yeah, it's not long at all.
But it says a lot about the craft of Whale and the makeup guy who I can't remember, Westmore, and
I thought it was
Elsa
Jack Pierce.
Is it Jack Pierce in this one? Yeah. And
because Elsa didn't like him. She thought he was an asshole.
And Elsa and everything that she is so iconic that I mean, she instantly became an icon, like King Kong, like Frankenstein. And we think, like myself, we think that there's a lot more import to her. I mean, she never says the freaking word. She doesn't have a line of dialogue.
No, she just hisses and screams pretty much.
But I remember it just being amazing looking. Everything being big and expansive, and those sets are so amazing. But I think I mentioned that when we did Frankenstein originally.
You did, and because they reused all those sets in Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks take up off in the
including the equipment
70s.
In the laboratory.
Right.
Yeah. And but this one, I'm not sure if Whale. I'll ask you after you, and you can give first impressions too. Well, let's do that first. Why don't you give your first impression? When did you first see it?
That's what I'm having trouble with. I'm sure that I saw it in the early 70s on like Shock Theater late at night. I'm sure that's probably where I saw it for the first time. And this movie to me is still a little bit is easily confused with Frankenstein because there are iconic scenes in both movies that are kind of interchangeable at times. And cast members, because Dwight Frye comes back for this movie and he died in the first movie. He played Fritz in the first movie and he plays another character in this movie.
Yes.
So, what I don't remember and what I do know now is what really blows me away is that how gay this movie is. This is like the gayest movie I've ever seen from that era. And I wouldn't have known that as a kid. Right.
I didn't realize it as a kid. And seeing it this time, doing the dive for this podcast, I was going, Yeah, I could see that because a lot of the documentaries talk about one of the ones had a great line, which was, if you ever want to see an example of a director injecting himself into his work, it is this particular movie
Hmm.
and Whale and everything else. But yeah, I agree with you. Looking at it now, it's like, yeah, there's some
It's
things to
almost
it.
campy in places.
And I'm wondering if it was like a perfect storm because, like you said, they'd approached him for like 4 years
Hmm.
with new scripts, new ideas, new cast, new whatever, want to do it, blah, blah, blah. And they also had a lead who was dealing with a huge alcohol issue.
Right.
And I wonder if those factors help contribute to him going back to the source, the book, and having that prologue the way they do, which sets everything up, and then having Pretorius, the character, who is in the book as well, to give a surrogate for a lot of Wales philosophies and a lot of Wales. I mean, people have talked about they were good friends anyway, Whale and the actor who played Pretorius.
He was Whale's mentor, I think, in theater.
Yeah.
I've got it in my notes. Yeah.
And that, so they copied mannerisms a lot. And so I think that's, and because he is definitely, he leads this movie. Frankenstein, not a doctor, but the scientist Frankenstein does not lead this movie. Pretorius does, in my
Right.
opinion.
No, he does. He does. Him and Karloff probably the most.
Yeah,
Hmm.
since the monster can speak now.
And that was
And it's
one.
like you said, it's confusing. I would have sworn when we had watched the original, I would have sworn the blind man scene is in the first movie, and it's not.
I would have
It's in
too.
this
I would
one.
have. Yeah,
Yep.
for sure. And
Yep.
not. It's really just the little girl scene, I guess, that we confuse it with, maybe, because that's a village type scene.
Yep. And
But
good homages in this. The first time he sees the girl on with the waterfall and everything.
Mhm.
That's a really great scene.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of thematics in it. There's a lot of one of the themes that I like that goes all the way through it. And again, this is talked about in a couple of the documentaries you can find on YouTube and places, is the theme of the outsider.
Hmm.
And Whale himself felt like an outsider in Hollywood. And so he imbued a lot of that in this script with, I mean, the monster is an outsider. The blind man, of course, is an outsider, so much so that he only stays in his little cabin way out in the woods.
He's a hermit.
Yeah. Frankenstein himself, the scientist, is an outsider.
Well, he's got a god
And
complex.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Pretorius, of course, is looked down upon by everybody, and he's an
Right.
outsider. So,
And
but
I mentioned to you in something we did, I think it was a thing we did for Patreon about genre origins, where the reason I, as a gay man, identified with all these old monsters was because I felt like an outcast as well. And they are all outcasts. So I identified with them. They're heroes to me. The monsters, that is. Yeah.
they call him Junior Limley a lot because his real name is Carl Limley Jr., who is essentially the head of Universal. Was
Okay.
he gay?
I have no idea. I don't even really know that much about him.
I know that he
Recruiting.
spearheaded and approved everything.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if he was recruiting James Whale, there could be one of two reasons: money, or that they had something in common. You know,
Well, he did
because of that, or he just
see
wanted to make money.
he did see Whale as his wonder boy, as the
Mhm.
wonderkin who could do anything. So either way, I think I just ask because you're right. There's a lot of from King Kong on, what Universal did, and I guess a huge, massive key over all of it is turns the monster into a sympathetic character.
Hmm.
That's why next week's is odd for us in our Universal search. But all of them, the creature, King Kong, you said Godzilla was in the Universal canon.
I think he is.
Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, they're all sympathetic in the way that they are eventually portrayed. Even though they might have done evil, awful things like bite natives in half or stomp on them or whatever, you realize why they're doing that. And it's just an animal and he's upset, but he has feelings and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I guess there is a feeling of being the outsider, the sympathetic outsider.
I won't dwell on this, but because I think I talked about it in our original Frankenstein episode, but I have Gods and Monsters on our list. It is not a horror or science fiction film. It is a documentary about James Whale, and it is fascinating because of the way they dramatize it, with him being obsessed with a pool boy played by Brendan Fraser, who looks like the Frankenstein monster, the way he walks and lumbers and stuff, because he's a big guy. Anyway, that's when I first started realizing all the gay undertones of this movie. But when I read that book, it was at the turn of the century. I wasn't renting as many horror movies. And I don't know, I guess I had not seen Bride of Frankenstein around the same time I read that book. So every time I rewatch it, I'm still a little surprised by how gay it was, going back to what I said originally. So Pretorius in particular.
The book, I mean, the movie Gods and Monsters, which I have not seen, and I need to have seen it, but
it won an Academy Award for screenplay, I think.
Well, and I think he was nominated too, because the lead in it, the whale, is played by Ian McKellen.
And then everyone else they cast is phenomenal because they look so much like Elsa Lanchester and Boris Karloff and the other people.
Colin Clive and all of it. Yeah, right. I'd read that. But to correct you just for a second, it's not a documentary, it's a biopic, right? It's a dramatization of the book.
I'm sorry, yeah. Did I say documentary? I meant biopic. Yeah, because it's a dramatization. Because there are things that happen in it that no one could know.
Right,
yeah.
Of course.
So it's dramatized for sure.
It takes a stand. It's almost like Trumbull, that kind of biopic stuff. But yeah, I think that there was there are gay overtones to it. I think there's eccentricity that I think we probably saw as kids, and that's what we represented or saw, rather than being gay or anything like that. Like, cause Pretorius is very eccentric, and he shot very eccentrically with low cameras looking up, and he's very
he is hilarious. And we'll come back to the gay stuff, I'm sure, when we get into casting. But scenes?
Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, you've got a whole recreation of the bringing her to life scene that they lift from Frankenstein, even using the same line. She's alive. She's alive.
Yeah. Yeah, the birth of her, and the way they do that, they go from she's alive to suddenly the music has a change. There's a huge drastic cut, and it's just when they're raising her up off the table. And I thought that was really a dramatic choice. Although, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But scenes, the first scene that came to mind when I thought, oh, I got to list scenes, was the scene where Igor captures the girl. I've forgotten totally about that. And that's pretty graphic. And I went, he murdered somebody just to bring a body back. Oh my God. It's not like Abby Normal the brain or whatever. He literally killed somebody.
Right.
Or this, and it's not, and I said Igor. It's not Igor. It's whoever he is in this one.
I can't remember his name. Is it the Dwight Fry character?
Yeah, the Dwight Fry character.
And he's more conniving because he speaks clearly.
But that was the scene that really hit me.
Carl is his name.
Carl.
Yeah. Another scene that strikes me is one behind me, because whenever I watched it, like a few years back when I had completely forgotten the film, I was like, I don't remember these special effects. This is really cool, with Pretorius and all those little people in those jars. And I'm like, what is this guy that is like keeping these little people in jars? How do they go to the bathroom? How do they eat?
Yeah, although freaking impossible. You can't create little baby miniature people and put little clothes on them and everything. That's just ridiculous. I think it's
an awesome scene when he starts pulling them jars out and Frankenstein's just staring at them.
Oh yeah, from a technical aspect, it's amazing. Even lifting them out and putting them in other jars and all of that.
Well, it made me think of Invisible Man, because the effects in that movie are so good. Who is James Whale using to do these effects?
Yeah. I think I saw in maybe in my notes that I'll find later, but I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks just to do that scene. Because because they're superimposing, so which means the camera and the lens have to be that far away from that little person,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have to frame them in the shot so that they
Mm-hmm.
can superimpose and put them in. They didn't
Yeah.
have computers or anything else. Everything had to be cut live like a mat. So that was really interesting. But yeah, that's a good scene that I repressed, I think, just because it's not one of my favorites, but it is technically.
Yeah, it's not. I guess it's not one of my favorites, but it's definitely one that sticks out that I remember. Yeah,
I think the whole opening is great. The way they do the right after the fire, and you got silly lady who's comic relief,
Una.
and we go, all right. But then way they first present the monster, and he comes from behind that column and everything, and you just get the light on him and the water and all. It's really great.
Yeah,
That's a good scene. You've got it also there. The scene in the crypt is great. All three sections of it. So when they first arrive, the scene with Frankenstein and the scene with the monster and Pretorius is all great.
I love the scene with the monster.
I have to embrace the fact that the monster's talking, but I give it to him.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, it was, I can't remember whose idea it was. Was it Universal or was it Whale? I think it was Whale.
I think it was Whale.
Because he had to convince Karloff, because Karloff did not want to do it.
No, and Jack Pierce was pissed off he did it because trivia, in the original Frankenstein, he took out his upper palate.
Right.
And so his face could be really sunken.
It was gaunt.
And look really good. And he did the same thing when he did the Mummy, which added that cadaverous kind of thing. But he can't speak with it out, so he had to keep it in for this. And that's why the makeup looks different.
He looks like he's more well-fed.
Yeah.
He's a little bigger. Yeah.
And they tried to augment that too by burning off some of his hair. Although I think the process didn't work because there are a couple of shots in this where the headpiece looks plastic almost, even though they didn't have plastic.
It looks more rounded to me instead of flat. Yeah.
And so it was just adjustments that they made, but it still works. And if they can bring Frankenstein back to life from that broken back, then obviously they can
bring the monster back speaking. Maybe he jarred
the monster start talking.
larynx, larynx or whatever.
Yeah.
So another obvious iconic scene is the scene with the hermit, the blind guy.
Oh my gosh.
It is wonderful. And it's just a testament to how strong of an actor Karloff is. Because any scene, there are a couple of scenes, if you watched a really good print like I did, where he cries. The monster is crying. You see tears come out of his eyes at the very end when they're going to blow up the castle and when he's talking to the blind man who he considers a friend.
Oh, we deserve death, or whatever that last line is. We deserve death.
We belong dead.
We belong dead. Yeah.
Very Schwarzenegger. So that would be another scene. Did you have any others?
No, I think those were all the good ones.
I just thought.
I mean, there's a lot good. This is one of my first notes after I watched it was, this is probably the first example of a sequel being as good or better than the original.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I didn't do my proper due diligence research and look back and see if it truly is in timeline of cinema. But I think it is. I think this is the first movie that is as good, if not better, than the original.
I agree. I don't think it's better, though. I still will always go to the original because to me, the original is scary and this one is not so much.
This one, he plays to humor a lot more in this. From that opening scene with what's her name, Una or whatever.
Una, you hated her in Invisible Man.
I don't like her in this either, but she's way over the top every scene she's in. But
she's a stock player of his.
But he uses, and even with Pretorius at times, he uses humor with that. Look at the devil. I've been told he looks like me. What do you think? Like, what?
He's great, though.
I say all that to say I agree with you. I think the original is much scarier. The way the creature hangs Igor and all the, I mean, just the beating of him and all the horror that I mean, it's scarier.
Yeah. Before I move on to cast, there are a couple things I want to mention. One is that the four movies I mentioned earlier, Frankenstein, Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein. Oh, no, excuse me. those three, and then the one you mentioned, The Man in the Iron Mask, were all nominated for AFI's top 100 thrills. So he has 4 movies on the AFI top 100, which is pretty impressive for a director that was in the 30s.
He was a Steven Spielberg of his day.
I didn't realize it as much until I started doing some research. He was beset with problems. We won't go into too many details. He did commit suicide by drowning himself, and he left a suicide note. All of that is, like I said, dramatized in the movie Gods and Monsters. But the other thing I want to mention as far as a key player in this movie is the music. I forgot how great the music is in this movie.
Waxman is the composer, and it's great. He is excellent. And
because it's borderline romantic. It's not, it's like a combo of gothic horror and romance. Like melded.
And it's motif too. It's leitmotifs all the way through, which is what I love about John Williams. And what I dislike a lot about Hans Zimmer is each of the characters in it has their own theme. And when they're on screen, you hear their theme. You hear the monster's theme. You hear Pretorius's theme. You hear Frankenstein's theme.
You hear the bride's theme when you first see her on the table.
Yep.
Or actually, no, I think it's when he first talks to Frankenstein, or the monster, about creating a bride. That's when you first hear her thing.
You hear that.
Yeah, it's like Gone with the Wind music or whatever. It's like da da da. And
it's very romantic.
It's romantic. And
but grandiose. Bombastic. And Waxman had said in interviews that he was very inspired by Wagner. He wanted Wagnerian elements to it. So lots of huge orchestration for the fights and the big scenes, and then lots of violin and cello romance for the slower scenes. So yeah, you're right. I'd forgotten. Oh, and I forgot a scene. You cannot say Bride of Frankenstein, especially for me, without the prologue. I love the prologue to this.
Oh, where they recap the first movie?
Yep. Well, where you've got Byron and Mary Shelley.
Yes.
Talking about the book and horror in general, and tell us another scary story, Mary, kind of thing.
And it's thundering and lightning outside, and they're and she's like, well, the story really wasn't finished. I'm gonna explain what happened now. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But then I loved also how they jumped into the recap with the shots from the first movie. I thought that was pretty cool too.
Great
back then, I guess that's what you did to remind people of what this was a sequel to.
Yeah, last week on Frankenstein, this happened. Yeah. But yeah, I thought it was very clever for whoever, Whale or the writer or whomever, to actually do it that way. To start with this prologue, saying we're going to talk about the book and the implications and yada yada, and then we're going to actually show you a little recap of how we ended, and then tell us the new story. Here we go.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you knew this, or you may have it in your notes. I'm not sure if I have it in my notes, but Whale filmed a lot more than what we see. And I don't know if it got destroyed or just because I don't know where those scenes are. They're not on the disc that I have. But like there were many more deaths. There was a lot more violence and stuff. And so he had to cut and trim and change things to get it down to a length and to get it down to being acceptable for the studio.
One of the things with the studio.
Yeah, he fought with them. They fought over the religious lines at Pretorius was one of the things where he had to change Bible stories to fairy tales because they're poking fun of religion, basically saying God doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah. Pretorius is very scientifically based and somewhat of an atheist in the way it was originally written. I also, the one that got me, which I had never heard of before, but in research, was there was a whole subplot with the Dwight Fry character. What was his name again? Carl. And he actually went and killed, just like he killed that woman that freaked me out. He went and killed like his aunt and uncle and blamed it on the monster. And it became another reason why the mob is so intent on destroying them at the end.
Right.
Because it wasn't just a single death, it was a bunch of them.
Yeah.
That are all attributed to the monster. And it's not his fault.
The mob is funny in this. They always turn up. It's like a Monty Python thing. It's like, oh no, angry villagers.
But I think subliminally, I think that's what Whale was saying. People all together will go to that lowest common denominator.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And a mob will turn on people, ostracize them, and destroy
we
them.
see it now.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Well, I will move on to cast, and I will try to go fast, but it's hard because there's a lot of famous faces in this.
Awesome faces. Yeah.
Yeah. James Whale often cast Una O'Connor, who plays she's the maid. I can't
The
remember her
maid.
name. Minnie, the maid of Dr. Frankenstein. He often cast her, Dwight Fry, Mae Clark, who plays the fiance of Frankenstein in this one, Boris Karloff, and Gloria Stewart. The only person not in this is Gloria Stewart that I just mentioned. As we know, Gloria Stewart was in other Whale movies like The Old Dark House and The Invisible Man, but she went on to be in James Cameron's Titanic movie. That's what she's probably known for most, because she came back from the silent era to do a very modern movie. Anyway, Boris Karloff reprises his role as the monster. I mean, what can you say? I mean, who doesn't know who Boris Karloff is? Along with actors Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi, and Vincent Price, he is probably the most recognized icon of American horror cinema. I say American because the Brits had Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, of course. He appeared in 80 films before his role in Frankenstein, which...
Yeah, really?
He was very much
I did not know that at all.
Well, there's another actor that did something very similar, and it's John Wayne. They were both like B-movie giants, just in B-movie after B-movie after B-movie before they got their big break. John Wayne's was Stagecoach, and Boris Karloff's was Frankenstein.
So he was obviously a studio player, right?
Right.
I mean, he was employed and just, okay. All right.
I mean, I don't know that John Wayne was Universal, though, but it was the same thing in a different studio. Yeah.
Yeah, he was probably MGM.
Colin Clive reprises his role as Dr. Frankenstein. As you mentioned, severe alcoholism hastened his death from tuberculosis, heart problems, and pneumonia. He died about 2 years after this movie was made. He was only 37. And in a lot of the scenes, you see him like behind me, he is in bed because he was having difficulty walking.
Yeah.
So, but he's great. He's still great in it.
Yeah, although he doesn't really, if you think about the import to the studio, he doesn't really do a lot. He doesn't stand up to Pretorius. He never has a redemption arc. He basically says, she's alive, and I want to do it again.
Well, I think that James Whale used him for what he could, and that
he
beefed up Pretorius because he knew he needed a stronger lead.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said. I think that's why he gave Pretorius so much of the plot rather than Frankenstein. So
totally agree. Valerie Hobson was the original Elizabeth Frankenstein. She was recast in this movie with a 17-year-old actress named Mae Clark, who went on, as I said, to become a regular player in James Whale movies. Elizabeth was played by a brunette in the original, and she is a blonde. Or maybe I have it backwards. Was she blonde in the original, and she's a brunette in this one? Apparently, I've got it backwards. Mae Clark is the original. Valerie Hobson's the replacement. Mae Clark continued to do movies with James Whale, but she had had an accident, and that's why she wasn't available for this movie. She had an illness. The change of hair color is a bit jarring, but it does pick up where the original left off. Since she was only 17, her salary was $800. She was a minor, basically.
Yeah.
So they got a deal on her. She's really good in it, though.
Yeah, she's good in this. And Mae Clark is good in everything she does. I mean, one of the things I saw in research, too, was that this was filmed pretty quickly. And it was filmed while most of the studio heads were gone, were away from the studio. So he could have essentially carte blanche to do what he wanted to.
That's why he had to cut a lot.
That's why, they ended up in post-production having a lot of struggles because he had to cut a lot because they didn't like the blasphemous Pretorius or any of that.
Right. Ernest Thesiger, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Thesiger was Dr. Pretorius. Other roles, he was in The Robe, which was a big movie, as well as The Old Dark House, which I have mentioned. He played this famous role of Dr. Pretorius because it was initially turned down by Bela Lugosi. Lugosi was always at odds with Karloff over salaries and fame. And I have a feeling that's probably what happened here. Universal then wanted Claude Rains, another very well-known person, to do the part, but James Whale instead insisted on Thesiger.
I think he's a good counterpoint to Frankenstein. I think Claude Rains could have done it, but if you cast him, he's too similar to Colin Clive.
And he would have been less gay.
And yeah, he would have been less gay.
For sure.
I don't think Bela Lugosi could have done this part at all.
It would
Not
have been
Pretorius.
too slow because Bella likes to drag things out.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been the energy to it. There
You need
definitely wouldn't
energy.
have been the gay to it. There wouldn't have been the manicness that I think Pretorius needs.
I actually think Lugosi could do the gay. I just don't think he could do the energy.
Okay.
I mean, when you
He's
watch him
a
walking
low-energy
around like
gay.
Dracula, he's got a lot of effeminate gestures, but and not that that's gay. Pretorius is very
Low-energy gay.
stereotypically gay. Ernest Thesiger lived in what is generally regarded as a lavender marriage. Janet Rankin, who you may have heard of, was known primarily as his beard. They were married in Janet Rankin. Wait, I think they were married for 16 years. My notes are a little bit jumbled. She was the sister of his close friend and fellow graduate, William Bruce Ellis.
I don't know those terms. I'm sorry.
Beard
and lavender. I don't know.
A lavender marriage is usually, it can be a number of things. Really, it's usually it's a marriage where one or both of the people are gay, and it's for appearances.
Oh, okay.
And a beard is usually a female cover for a gay man. Like when Rock Hudson married Phyllis Gates was his beard. Beard butches you up, so to speak. It's like slang.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't know I was going to go deep diving into gay, the gay lexicon.
I wasn't in class that day. I missed.
Yeah. Anyway, it's almost like he was in an arranged marriage with Jeanette Rankin. She said herself to be in love with the poet Margaret Jourdain. So she was obviously gay too. So they were a gay couple that were getting married for appearances.
It's interesting without spoiling anything for you, For All Mankind, that series, there is a couple like that are both of them are homosexual, but they get married because it's in the 50s or 60s, and they have to further their careers, they have to appear normal at the time or heterosexual, or one of them would be arrested.
Yeah.
So
it was very common. It's not unusual. As a matter of fact, there are two other more famous versions that may not necessarily be the truth, may be rumor. One of them was Hepburn and Tracy.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. But another one is Elsa Lanchester and Charles Laughton. Elsa, who was in this movie.
Oh, okay.
And she made her stage debut in 1922 in the West End play. She was an English theater actress. That's how she knew James Whale. 30 Minutes in a Street. In 1924, her partner, Harold Scott, opened a London nightclub called the Cave of Harmony. The spot was frequented by literati like Aldous Huxley, H.G. Wells, and James Whale. So she worked at a bar where these guys hung out.
Yeah.
That's pretty damn cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah. She is billed in this movie not only as the monster's mate, which she really isn't because it says question mark, but she's billed as Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley from the beginning scene that we talked about with the writers telling the stories.
Another good choice by Whale.
Yeah.
Of having heard you both. That was really cool.
She became associated in 1927 with a rather self-possessed but keenly dedicated actor, Charles Laughton. He appeared with her in three of four films Lanchester did in 1928. Three of these were written for her by H.G. Wells.
Wow.
Isn't that just blows my mind. You can tell I did a deep dive on it. Whale brought her to the States, and MGM offered her a contract in 1932.
And Laughton was a hunchback, right?
Yes, he did play the Hunchback. I remember him more as in comedic roles, and I think he may be in the Old Dark House. He
Okay.
usually plays a portly comic relief type,
Okay.
but sometimes he's more serious. He may be in some Humphrey Bogart movies now that I think about it. Anyway, it was long rumored that he was gay. I don't know about her as much, but I had heard rumors that it was a lavender marriage. The dual role of Mrs. Shelley and the monster's mate was offered to Bridget Helm, but she had recently married and refused to leave Germany. Louise Brooks was another actress considered by James Whale for the role before he decided to split cast it with Elsa.
Wow. Okay.
So he did have other people he was thinking about. Lord Byron was played by Gavin Gordon. He's an American character actor. He was in Mystery of the Wax Museum, which was the predecessor of House of Wax, which we have covered on this podcast. His companion for many years was actor Edward Everett Horton, who was 15 years his senior, and they appeared together in Pocketful of Miracles with Bette Davis. So another gay actor, just American.
Right.
Douglas Walton was a Canadian actor. He played Percy Shelley. He was not gay. He was in the Count of Monte Cristo, Mutiny on the Bounty, and The Picture of Dorian Gray, which we have covered on this podcast. David Niven screen tested for that Percy Shelley role.
That would have been good.
Yeah, the guy that plays him, this Douglas Walton, looks to me like Leslie Howard, the guy that plays Ashley.
Yes,
in Gone with the
a
Wind.
lot like him. Well, and the coat and tails don't hurt too much either. So there's that.
Right. Oh, and I've got a note in the wrong place. But the reason Claude Rains didn't play Dr. Pretorius was because he was filming The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which also came out in 1935. So the studio may have been trying to force him on Whale. All right, Minnie, played by Una O'Connor, Irish character actor that you can't stand. Her final role was the devoted housekeeper in Billy Wilder's Witness for the Prosecution, a role that she originated on stage. I did not know that, but I know you like that play. I just wanted to mention that. She has appeared in 8 films that were nominated for Best Picture.
Wow.
Yeah. She was in Calvaclade, The Barretts of Wimple Street, David Copperfield, The Informer, The Adventures of Robin Hood, which I watched the other day, by the way. First time I'd ever seen that. Random Harvest, The Bells of St. Mary's, and, as I said, Witness for the Prosecution. All those movies were nominated for Best Pictures, and she was in them. Elsa was not the only person to have a dual role in this film, though, because in addition to her role as Minnie, Una also appeared in the prologue as Shelley's maid, who is holding the leash as the dogs go off screen. So she's in 2 scenes, or she's in two characters. Very memorable character actress, though, even if you do not like her.
Yeah, I mean, you can see where Cloris Leachman got all of her chops from.
Oh my God, I had not really thought about that, but you're right. You're absolutely right.
That's who she's doing. She's doing that character.
The Burgomaster was played by E.E. Clive, who was also in The Invisible Man. He appeared in 6 Oscar picture nominees. I won't go into those like I did the other, but he's a smaller character. The Hermit was played by O.P. Heggie, an Australian actor that was also a Broadway actor. James Whale was so set on having Heggie play the blind hermit that he shut down production from February 19th to March 2nd while waiting for Heggie to film a role on an RKO set.
Wow. Yep.
So he shut down production because he wanted that guy to play the hermit so bad. That's a strong choice. Now, in Young Frankenstein, you remember who played him?
Peter Boyle. No. Gene Hackman played
Gene
the
Hackman.
hermit.
Yeah, it was Gene Hackman. And then lastly, well, I do have a few extra notes, but Dwight Fry played Carl. He was Fritz in the original. We mentioned that, the Igor-like character. He was also a Broadway actor. I did not know this before moving to film. He was cast with Bela Lugosi in the 1926 production of The Devil and the Cheese. He ultimately appeared in 2 other Lugosi films. But did you watch that documentary I sent you with his son? Yeah. His son was in it, and he looks like him. It's funny.
He does.
Little extra casting notes I have. The Tiny Mermaid in Pretorius' Bottle was Joseph McKim. She was a member of the 1924 to 1928, at 1924 and 1928 Olympic swimming team.
Mm-hmm.
She was 4 members to win the gold medal in 1928 of the team. She was also Maureen O'Sullivan's body double in Tarzan and His Mate. And though all his scenes were cut, Billy Barty, famous little person, played a baby in one of those bottles, but he is briefly glimpsed in a wide shot, and that's all. You can't see his face.
Right.
But Billy Barty would have been, I did the math, he would have been 11. He was born in 1924. So he was playing a baby in a bottle almost as an adult, as a teen anyway. If you look closely, you can see Walter Brennan 30 minutes into this movie when they discover the Newmans. He is to the viewer's right as an onlooker that says, "Poor old Newman," when they place him on the table.
Okay.
And then another famous face is John Carradine.
That's the one I was waiting for. Yep.
Yeah, he's one of the 2 hunters that appear at the Herman's cabin when they realize that the monster is talking with the hermit, and they end up burning down his damn house. I mean, it's horrible.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. But I remember seeing it and hearing that voice, it's the monster. And I went, that's freaking John Carradine. It has to be.
Yeah.
And I waited for the next shot, which was a close-up of him. I said, that's John Carradine. I did not know he was in this movie.
Well, he's a huge Universal player. He's in so many Universal movies. And whenever the people like Karloff and Lugosi stopped playing the monsters, Carradine always took them over. He was Frankenstein, or the monster. He was Dracula, whatever. Yeah. So Carradine, big. That's all I have on cast. Since this movie is so old, most of the awards are posthumous, like DVD collection stuff. It was nominated for an Oscar for Best Sound Recording.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it did not win. It's a 1998 winner in the National Film Registry, which is very warranted, and it is on the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die.
It should be. It should be. If not as one of the first sequels, it should be as good as the original. So, yeah. I've got several trivia things about it in my notes here. So you had mentioned the special effects. They're done by a guy named John P. Fulton, who is the head of the special effects department at Universal, who also did Invisible Man.
I figured he must have.
And it took them over 3 days to shoot the actors in the full-size jars, and then background plates and rotoscoping and matting took about 3 weeks to put them all in where they should go. Kenneth Strickfaden, that name I looked up because that's who Mel Brooks approached to say, where did you get the equipment from for Frankenstein? And he said, well, I know the warehouse where it's still stored. And that's how Mel Brooks got to use the original equipment back from it. Yeah,
I would have
they
loved
kept it 40 freaking years.
I mean, I went and saw Young Frankenstein. I think it came out in 1976. I went and saw it on my birthday in the theater, and I was too young to obviously have seen Frankenstein in a theater, but I would have loved to have been a part of that Young Frankenstein production. That would have been amazing.
You can go on YouTube and get the outtakes from it, and they are well worth watching. They are hilarious between all of those people. The 4 leads.
Madeline Kahn, Gene Wilder, Terry Garr. Yeah. What's his name? Peter Boyle.
Oh, Peter Boyle is good too. But also Marty Feldman.
And Marty Feldman, Gene Hackman. Wow.
And so much of it improv, so much of it off the cuff, so much of it just trying to keep a straight face while somebody does something else.
I mean, a lot of people say Blazing Saddles is his crown, but I've always thought it was Young Frankenstein.
I've always said it's Young Frankenstein.
But we also have a strong connection to the genre.
Correct. And obviously that's a loving homage to it, where I do not think Spaceballs is. I think Spaceballs is a campy
rip-off,
kids version rip-off of Star Wars, as opposed to an homage to the original. So, but anyway, we digress.
We've already digressed to keys because Young Frankenstein is a huge
Young Frankenstein is a huge key. But in this trivia, there's some keys too, like the inspiration for the bride's look was Nefertiti, and to have this very straight thing like the hieroglyphics have, and that was an actual bird cage in her hair. That's what they did to get the hair the way it was. It's a bird cage that was then redressed with the spot with the lightning bolt and everything else. So iconic. What do I have?
Oh,
Took her
are you doing trivia or are you doing keys? Because I was going to do some trivia first, but
trivia keys. Yeah, go ahead.
we
More
did
trivia.
kind of segue into keys with the Young Frankenstein, but
But we got both happening.
we do.
So,
Did you? I have that line you mentioned earlier. We belong dead. We belong
yeah.
dead. I love that line. Is the number 63 of the 100 greatest movie lines.
Wow.
I mean, that's right up there with, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
I have in trivia, it took her 3 hours to get into makeup, about the same time that it did for Karloff.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to mention that she was very uncomfortable in her garb as well. That
Yes,
she was
very much.
wrapped so tight she couldn't hardly move. They had to pick her up and take her around. They had to
Mhm.
feed her with like a straw, very similar to other movie monster makeups that you hear about.
Mhm.
And she had a personal aversion to Jack Pierce, the makeup artist. She said he was an asshole, but I think it
Yep.
also may be the fact that she was having to endure all this shit too.
Yeah, all these bandages, the corset she had to wear. They said she's quoted as saying that she drank as little liquid as possible because once she was in it, she
She
couldn't
couldn't
go to the
pee.
restroom.
Right.
Yeah, so there was a lot of that. I've got just some trivia production notes. So overall, they began shooting on January 2nd, ended on March 7th. So just over 2 months. But like you said, 2 weeks of that. Jack Whale paid everybody, but put the whole production on hiatus while he waited for the hermit to come. By the end of it, he was $100,000 over budget. He was 10 days over budget, and his original cut was 90 minutes long that the studio forced him to cut to 75. So that was
Hmm.
just some production details, so to
Yeah.
speak.
I heard there were a lot more deaths, like a lot more murders in this
Yeah.
that got cut.
The murders got cut. Like I said, the whole backstory with Carl killing his own family and blaming it on the monster was cut. A lot of Pretorius and Henry scenes were cut because they were considered blasphemous at the time,
Mhm.
so to speak. So,
Well, speaking of things that were also cut, several scenes were also cut that were references to the scandalous sexual arrangements of the historical figures in the movie, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, and Lord Byron, who there were lines like, "We are all three infidels, scoffers at marriage ties, believing living in freely and fully." They were swingers,
oh
basically.
yeah, then
And
and
they objected to
relationship.
that and cut that stuff. They also cut some of Elsa Lanchester's cleavage in the beginning as well.
Yeah. Well, and I have a negative to it, so to speak, than an opinion, but also want to get your thoughts on it. I like this movie a great deal, but I do think the ending is extremely abrupt,
Very
almost as
abrupt.
abrupt as a Village of the Dam, which we talked about a few weeks ago. But
Yeah.
I also think that the whole last half of it seems to be missing something. They do this huge build up to her, and then we kill her in one scene. But the way it's shot, I don't see how they could have added scenes and then gone back to the laboratory and blown it up. So it had to always have been structured that this was going to be the last scene. But I wonder
Or
if he,
or stuff was cut from the climax.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, more interaction with Pretorius and Frankenstein or whatever, something there.
Hmm.
And I also have in my notes, I wonder why he didn't do an epilogue. If he had done a prologue so well with the three of them sitting around the fire talking,
That would have summed it up. Yeah.
why didn't he go back to that and
I
say,
agree.
well,
I
what
think
do
that
you
would have been
think about
great.
it, Mary? And maybe he did, and that's some of the stuff he cut because maybe it was too controversial.
Maybe that was
You
the
know?
stuff where they were talking about scoffing at marriage and stuff. I don't
Right.
know.
Right. I imagine going back to that and you hear Shelley go, "Oh, Mary, you can't end it that way." And she's going, "Why not?" Blah, blah, blah. And they actually talk about it. And it is that we're unconventional people and the world is unconventional. It's not always going to be the way you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
That might have been really
And
interesting.
then the stranger that they're all going to sleep with comes to the door, and it's Boris Karloff.
And it's Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. I've got some other things I will try to read fast. James Whale had a disdain for being boxed into timelines, which is very evident. Did you notice this? The village wear stereotypical Tyrolean outfits, but Henry and Elizabeth wear contemporary clothes. Pretorius calls the instrument Henry speaks to Elizabeth as an electronic device, but the only wires seen are from the receiver to the box. There's no wiring from the box to the wall. He never calls it a telephone. Carl says the body chosen for the bride died in 1899, and Pretorius's wine has a date of 1912.
Okay.
All transportation is done on foot or by horse and carriage, which Whale just did not care about consistency at all.
No.
Well,
it's the same thing with his scene timing. You've got her, and she runs screaming from the monster that has climbed up right behind her, and the very next shot is her running up and banging on the door, and it's like, what? How much time has passed? Where is the woods right?
You're talking about Una.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
and there's
funny.
2 or 3 things. I think there's the other one when the hunters find, because it's another good scene that I didn't mention that I like the scene, but when he's first in the woods and sees the girl and she slips and falls in the water, and it's that whole homage to the first movie, and you think he's going to kill her, but he doesn't. He rescues her and pulls her out, but then she starts screaming and he's covering up her mouth, and you're going, oh my God, he's going to kill her again. But the hunters appear, they rescue the girl, the monster goes running off, and then the next scene is like 30 people running through the woods chasing the monster.
Yeah.
What happened? Where did they get these guys from?
Well, and that's another thing that could interchange with the first movie. All the persecution of Boris Karloff is interchangeable. Like running through the cemetery, getting trapped on that little hill thing before they capture him, having him tied like Christ to the crucifixion thing, whatever it is. They've got him chained to that pole. Yep. Then they put him in that big electric chair, which I always confuse with the first movie. It's not electric. It looks like an electric chair. It's a big wooden chair with chains. Yeah. And he breaks out of it immediately. It's not holding him very long at all.
Yeah. No, and busts the door down and kills the 2 guards.
Yeah, he kills a lot of people. Yeah, it's great.
Like, there's no point in, you didn't tie him up very well at all. In that.
But I love that he kills a lot of people, but it's like if you're nice to him, he doesn't kill you. Like he doesn't kill the hermit.
Well, and he doesn't, the monster never kills out of vengeance or something. It's usually self-defense or some form of, you're in my way. Like he only kills those guards because they're standing in front of the door, and he's just really just pushes them away to break the door down. So it's that stuff too. I think they're very clever in not making him malicious. In the first one, the only reason he kills the girl is because there's nothing else to throw in the water. So he throws her in. He didn't know she couldn't swim. Come on.
No. We probably talked about this when we covered Frankenstein, but there are a couple of reasons, and I have them in here. I'm going to try not to read all this because it's too much, but that we confuse the word Frankenstein with the monster instead of Frankenstein with the doctor.
Of course.
Because a lot of people call it the Frankenstein monster, which is appropriate, but some people just call him Frankenstein, like Phil Hartman on Saturday Night Live. One of the reasons is this movie's preview, one of the first previews for this movie's have the words, if you have a weak heart, better leave now because Frankenstein returns. And it was superimposed under Boris Karloff's face.
Yeah.
And not Colin Clive's face. So that's one reason. Another reason is that when the 3 are talking at the beginning of the film, Byron says, can you believe that bland and lovely brow conceived of Frankenstein, a monster created from cadavers out of rifled graves? Isn't it astonishing? So he refers to the monster as Frankenstein, and they don't correct him. So there's another reason why we may make that assumption as well, or it has been made over the decades.
Yeah. I think another Mandela I found was Frankenstein is not a doctor. He's never called a doctor in the movies, and he's not a medical
He's like Dr.
doctor.
Phil.
Yeah. Yeah. So they don't call him a doctor. They call him either Henry or Frankenstein. Yet
Yeah.
we in history have always called him Dr.
Oh,
Frankenstein.
that's true. I hadn't thought about that.
But he's
Funny.
not. Now, Pretorius is a doctor, and they refer to him as doctor. But they don't refer to Frankenstein as a doctor. So I thought that was interesting that we have that Mandela in our head that, oh, that's Dr. Frankenstein. And that's Frankenstein, the monster.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Two more quick ones. And this plays to what you said earlier. This movie ends abruptly. I said 10 minutes, but it's actually 5. The Bride is the most obscure of Universal's classic monsters. She is on screen for less than 5 minutes and is the only classic monster never to have killed someone.
That's a cool one. I had a question for you. Is there another iconic female monster?
No, not in Universal.
I can't think of even since then. I mean, the girl in the ring, maybe?
I was thinking of like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
No, that doesn't. Well, yeah, I guess that would answer my
Sci-fi, but
question.
yeah.
But yeah,
I watched that
But-
recently.
you can't say Reagan because Reagan was possessed, so she's not a monster.
Yeah, I
But-
can't think of any offhand. If I think of any, I will come back to
Yeah,
that subject.
That might be. And if you got out there listening and watching, let us know. What am I
Yeah.
missing about iconic female monsters?
As far as her not killing people, though, it can be argued that her rejection of the monster Frankenstein drove her and him to suicide, or drove him to suicide.
I'm sure of that.
Because she
I'm
rejects him and he's like, "We belong dead,"
Yeah,
and blows up the castle.
yeah. I mean, we feel empathy for him. We say, yeah, go for it, dude. You should, because these people are monsters. And I like the fact that the sub theme underneath there is Pretorius really is a monster. He's a self-absorbed maniac.
He's the bad guy.
He's the bad guy.
Yeah. Because he's manipulating Henry, who's
Yes.
clearly recuperating and not in any frame of mind to be doing anything. And he's up the very next day.
And it's been a while since I've read it, but correct me out there if I'm wrong, but I think in the novel, Henry actually kills Pretorius.
Oh,
I'm
I
pretty
can't
sure he
remember.
does.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read that.
I think Henry kills him, though, not the monster. So,
Maybe. And
Yep.
this is my note, which explains why I keep saying they cut murders out. The body count was originally 21. After it was trimmed, there's only 10. So there were a lot more killings in this movie that did not make it. I wish I
Yeah.
could find those. I mean, I have deluxe editions, multiple deluxe DV editions of this movie and Frankenstein, and I only have one bio on this one, and it's that one I sent you, Bride of Frankenstein, with all those people like Clive Barker and stuff in it.
yep.
All right, well, that's all I have. If you want to go to keys, which we've already named a few.
Yeah. I've got some. I'm going to say that one because it's cool and we'll use it. Like we said, Young Frankenstein. I've got Gothic. Gothic
Yeah.
was and I think that's correct. That's the movie with Percy Shelley and Byron.
It is.
and-
It's Ken Russell.
yeah, and it's the night they created essentially Dracula and Frankenstein.
Right.
In their story. So I've got that one.
It's not Dracula, though. It's just a vampire, I think, because Bram Stoker did Dracula. But yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, it's like the
Um,
first vampire story or something, and the first, obviously, Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've mentioned, you said Young Frankenstein, you said Gods and Monsters. I've got both of those on my
I
list.
don't have gods and monsters.
I've
Yeah.
got Faust. The story of Pretorius in this is essentially the devil, and he's going to Henry to give him another bargain and to threaten him and to get him to do what he wants to do, which curses both of them. So I've got a very Faustian story.
It is very Faustian. I had not thought of that, but you're right. I mentioned Phil Hartman. Phil Hartman was one of my favorite people ever to come out of Saturday Night Live. He died tragically. He was shot by his wife in the 90s. But he used to play the Frankenstein monster in very memorable skits with John Lovitz and Kevin Nealon, where it was Tarzan, Tonto, and Frankenstein. And all he would do is go, fire bad.
Yep.
So it's even more to this movie than it is the first movie because he speaks friend good.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got one you might not have. I was very lucky. I was on one of my trips. This was several years ago, but Fathom Productions is this company that takes unique experiences and only offers them like once or in a very limited run. And a lot of times they'll take like a film version of a theatrical experience that nobody has seen, but they're going to show it in theaters all over the country on these dates. And you have to buy tickets in advance. You have to get there and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I was on this trip and they had a Fathom event, and it was the National Theatre of London, their version of Frankenstein, which was directed by Danny Boyle. And it starred Benedict Cumberbatch and Lee Miller. And the unique thing about the run in London when they did it was they flipped characters every night between Frankenstein and the monster. So one night Benedict would be the Frankenstein and Miller would be the monster.
Well, because you wouldn't have to memorize lines for two characters, really. Not a lot, anyway.
Well, you would. I mean, you have to be both characters.
Well, so did Frankenstein so did the monster talk a lot in it?
Yeah, this was very faithful. By the end of the second act, they are near Antarctica. They're doing the bride, and he is conversing and everything. But it is and I think now you can find that version either through the BBC or YouTube or somewhere. And it is the birth of the monster is like the first 15 minutes, and it's no dialogue whatsoever. And it's the creation of the monster. And it is so well done, but very theatrical. But anyway, obviously inspired by this version, by the Mary Shelley original novel, and everything else.
What is it called?
It's called Frankenstein.
Can't look it up that way, David.
Well, National Theatre Frankenstein.
Okay.
And you'll be able to find it.
Yeah, I would think well, there's that. And I was also going to mention, just you would know better than I because I've only seen one season. But that season, that Penny Dreadful, did they ever do a bride story in there?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I figured that would be a key as well. Anything that ties to these old Universal movies.
Yeah, I've got. What else do you have? Sorry, you do yours. I didn't mean.
Well, I have not much, but one that I used in the original Frankenstein coverage that we did 5 years ago is Alice Cooper's song "Ballad of Dwight Fry," which is a wonderful classic rock song by Alice Cooper that is inspired by Dwight Fry, who played Renfield in Dracula and Fritz and Frankenstein,
and Carl and the Bride.
And Carl and the Bride, yes.
Yeah. I have Frankenhooker because it's definitely inspired by Frankenstein, although it's a totally different.
Well, it's Frank Henenlotter's take
on it.
Yeah.
I also have tropes, and the tropes weren't created by this particular film, but they were prior to it in the novel and the works of H.G. Wells and the works of Bram Stoker and everything else, and then have since been used. But tropes like mad scientists in general, scientists going mad and going crazy and thinking that they're superior, yada, yada. The trope of creating life, of man's pursuit to create life, and playing God. Pretorius is notorious in this for his opinion that there is no God, that the Bible is ridiculous, that science is the ultimate achievement.
Does he die? Is he in the castle when it blows up at the end?
Yes.
I think he is. Yeah, I think he dies.
Frankenstein, Pretorius, the monster, and the bride all die because Carl's already dead.
And the wife escapes.
Henry and his wife both escape.
They do, because the monster actually tells them to go.
Yeah, she rescues him, and then makes them stay because we belong dead.
Because we belong dead.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that all day. I have, just in thinking about it and looking at that picture behind me, I have watched the trailer of this, and it reminds me of the trailer for Casablanca because they play, well, and it may be a modern trailer, it may not be the original, but I think it's the original, where they play up the romance of it. The Bride. It is, in a macabre way, a romance story. It doesn't turn out happy, though. Most romance stories are happy endings. This one doesn't.
But it's not a romance till like that last third.
Right.
Before that, we're still hunting the monster, and
You're
he's
right.
still
But you've
alive
still
and
got romantic music all throughout.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a weird hybrid. It's a James Whale piece. He at the time, I guess, could be considered a director that was like a Tarantino or something, that has his own signature on a film because it is so unique.
Yeah, I've got in my notes that he actually wrote a script and was going to be hired to direct Dracula's Daughter.
I saw
Which
that.
was going to be a third, I guess the third sequel to
And
Dracula.
it's so wild because his story got rejected. I can't remember what it was. I read something about
censors hated it, they said. Censors hated it. They said
they did because it was probably gay. But the funniest thing about it is the Dracula's Daughter that is out there is also gay. It's on our list, and I put it on there purposefully because there is a notorious lesbian character in that.
All right, then.
Well, if she's not lesbian, she might as well be because she portrays her as looking very lesbian-esque, if that's a word.
Well, and if you look at the wiki, the wiki steps back and says, stop portraying Whale as this is his gay movie because actually he's just an artist and this is his artistry and yada yada. And I agree with that. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention it. I don't think he had an agenda going into it saying blah blah blah. I'm going to make the gayest horror movie in the world.
Not at all.
I think he just said, look at the empathy. I mean, empathetically look at these characters and look how society shuns them and puts them in boxes and says you have to do this.
Right. And the reason I say stuff like that, and I don't want people to come for me either, is not only because actually because I'm gay, I have always looked for things in movies because I've always looked for things to identify with. So when I see it, I'm going to point it out. But I agree with you. This is his artistic vision, and whatever those undertones that are in it just came as a result of that vision.
Yeah.
Because that's him. Yeah.
I mean,
so
I didn't find anything.
And that's why I was saying about Dracula's Daughter, too. I'm sure it's the same.
Yeah, I didn't find anything in research that was like, oh, look at his other films, too, and his woke agenda or whatever.
But it is funny that when you watch that documentary, Clive Barker, who is gay, said Dr. Pretorius is a notorious queen.
Yeah, that's exactly the quote, I think, is he says.
It's very similar. Yeah.
So he saw if you go to the wiki page for Bride of Dracula, it's got some great detail and some great stuff. But one of the things it talks about is the Christian imagery and how much of it was cut or forced to be cut from the verbiage of fairy tales, not Bible stories, cutting the crucifix, because originally he wanted the creature with
his arms are like this instead
he's up like a witch. So it's the same iconography of an outsider being abused by the mob, but also all the LGBTQ plus reading into it.
Right.
And one of Whale's companion, David Lewis, stated flatly that Whale's sexual orientation was not germane to any of his filmmaking. Quote, Jimmy was first and foremost an artist, and his films represent the work of an artist, not a gay artist, an artist.
Right.
And I think that's very well said, too.
I think that's what we strive to say today, because there are so many gay filmmakers out there now. They don't want to be known as the gay filmmaker. They want to just be known as a filmmaker. Yes.
Do your work and do the great work that you have and stuff. So, yeah. But I am so glad you picked this for a Christmas present for me because I I had not watched this in probably decades.
Yeah, me
And
too.
to see it again was really great, and to see how good it is for the time. I mean, what is this? This film is almost 100 years old.
It's like a 89 years old. It'll be
Yeah.
135.
So almost 90 years old. It'll be 90 years old next year.
2035. Yeah.
So, and to be as good, and the lighting, the sets, the costuming, the effects that go into it, it's just a really
Actors.
great work of cinema.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I only had one other key, and it's not really a key. That Elsa based her hissing on swans she used to see in a park in England. Hang on, I have the note here. Swans she would see in Regent's Park in London. She said they're really very nasty creatures. She said if you go up near them, they will hiss at you. And that's what she based her character on.
And to be so pretty in the extreme, but then a hiss.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. Well, speaking of swans, this is our swan song. We love doing it for you guys. We'd love to know what you guys think. Do you like Bride of Frankenstein? Do you like James Whale? Do you like Elsa Lanchester, or any of the effects or anything in it? Let us know down below. Give us a little review. How good did we do doing it? Are there other keys we're missing? We sometimes don't ask that, but we actually should ask.
I think it's because we think of so many keys now on a regular basis that we just overlook things because they're so obvious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. And also, I think week after week after week, we're trying to search for references and key elements, and it tends to say, "Oh, we said that last week. It's the same thing about this movie." So that happens,
especially if it's the same filmmaker. Yeah.
Yes, but we're going to continue Christmas going forward with another Universal monster next week, and that'll be a good one as well, one I've been waiting for a long time. And we would love for you guys to love us, to rate us, to like us, do all that, especially if you can jump on Apple and even give us a single star review. Any review is great and gets us into their algorithm. We also have a Patreon, of course, so patrons can go and see additional stuff we have, some of it free, some of it tier-based. But it's a lot of good stuff. And Tim, I'm excited about next week. I can't wait to do that one.
I am. Ho, ho, ho.
We'll see you then.
All right. Bye.
Can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.